Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast here on Monday in March. Hope everyone is doing well. As you join us today, I hope that you will let us know where you're joining from. And as always, of course, hope that you will comment and add to our conversation. It's much better when you engage and are involved. As always, we start off the show explaining what wisdom is about for the podcast. And wisdom's a journey, and there are three primary steps in the process of that journey. First is gaining knowledge. We can gain knowledge formally, informally, just different ways, and hopefully it's something that each of us is seeking to gain each day, learn something new. And then but we don't want to stop there because, contrary to what some people have indicated or think that knowledge is our power, it's not. Because unless you can do something with the knowledge, it is just data. And the second step in this process is to go to understanding. And understanding means we begin to take the knowledge we've gained and we bring it to make it personal. And we begin to apply it in our lives. And we begin to use it, hopefully, in constructive ways. Unfortunately, some people will use it in negative or destructive ways. But we begin to apply it and we use it to solve questions and find answers and to, again, make things happen. And this turns into experience. And this is something that we'll do ongoing. And hopefully, as we continue forward, we get more and better experience along the way. And then the third step and the primary step in this process is actually when we move from knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And what happens is when we go to wisdom, we begin to see the world in a different way. We began to see the world outside of ourselves. I mean, we have to include ourselves and be a part of it, no doubt. But it is when we become wise and begin to see our knowledge and understanding from a wise perspective, we also begin to see things outside of ourselves. We began to see that our choices factor not just for ourselves, but for others. And the choices affect others. And as we look, we also need to be sure that we're looking inwardly, because our choices, use of our knowledge and understanding affect us inwardly, but also outwardly. And so we make that distinction. And for those of us that are of a spiritual bent, the thought process is that we begin to see things through God's eyes and see that the world from a different lens. So that's that process that we go through, and it is a part of our growth. And of course, very important that we make this a priority and be a wisdom seeker on a regular basis. And it is good to see this morning Rosemary and Carmen and Lydia with us. Thanks for being here. And again, just let us know that you are here and that where you're joining from, and make comments. And so as I considered the topic for today, really started thinking about that maybe we need to have a little more discussion, have a little more insight and understanding in how to make the transition to wisdom, because it's not just simply a matter of making a choice. It's part of that process. And for it to be most effective, it has to be a process that involves thought about what is going on, and it is involves intentionality, I guess is the best way to put it, as we move forward. So we're going to talk about that process and how that we can do this, because the knowledge and understanding is fine and it's the beginning of processes, but the ultimate goal is to be able to uh, make the change or the leap, if you will, to wisdom. And one of the things, and I've shared this before, in fact, the first episode of Wisdom Seekers talked about a process. We called it the 40-day challenge, but there's a 3-step process, and it helps us to be able to make, or at least contribute towards making the transition from knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And this process involves 3 parts. And the first one is to begin to disconnect. And the problem that we have in a lot of what we do is we are so wrapped up in what we normally do and how we normally do it that we don't recognize different things because of distraction. And for many of us, the biggest distraction that we have is social media and media. And I would even suggest for many, more than social media is traditional media. But whatever it is in our lives, we have to begin to make a choice. We have to be intentional to actually choose to let go of some of these things. And some of the things that we're going to let go of, they're going to be temporary, short term. It could be a matter of hours, minutes, hours, even days, or in some cases, we're going to discover that those distractions have kept us from gaining the wisdom that we need. So just begin to be intentional about how we can disconnect and get rid of distractions that we have in our lives. And then the second step is that we begin to observe. And again, this is part of being intentional in what we do, is that we pay close attention to what's going on around us. And we observe inwardly what's going on inside of us, because at the end of the day, that's going to be one of the key elements to gaining wisdom, is seeing our internal activity, if you will, and the consequences of our internal decisions, if you will. And then we observe also outwardly. And this is where we begin to see how our choices impact other people and how they factor into what is going on. And we begin to see the day-to-day, because as we move along, many of us are operating in what I call autopilot. We're just going through the motions, especially if you're in a situation where your behaviors and your work and everything are very predictable. We get to a point where we go through the motions and lose sight of what is going on around us. So observe is the second step in this process that I recommend that we consider. And I believe that most of us need this on at least a daily basis because of the busyness that we're involved in. So first, we make a choice to disconnect from distractions. Second is to observe what is going on around us. And then the third step in that process is where we begin to seek out wisdom. And that process, I've had people ask me, what is the process of seeking out wisdom? And that is, it's multifaceted. But at the end of the day, it also needs to be very intentional. And I believe we have a lot of people that are not intentional in this step. And that's part of the reason we have a lot of people that are missing out on the wisdom that they could have, because they aren't intentional about wisdom, but even not intentional about living. It's a real challenge that we face. So how do we become intentional about wisdom? First of all, we have to make it a priority. It has to become a part of our schedule. It's a choice that we make to set aside time to not only disconnect and observe, but process what we observe. And we have to take the time to consider what do we see going on? Do we see in our world around us? Do we see people hurting? Do we see people happy? Do we see things going forward, going backwards? Just making it a point to make these observations. By the way, welcome to Braden from Lawrenceville. Thanks for being here, Braden. I hope this is the Braden that I know and go to church with. Hope that he's able to be live with us today. So, making the leap to wisdom. Very much has to be intentionality involved. We have to make a choice and make it a priority. The other part is we have to have some understanding of us as a person. You know, in order to gain wisdom and it apply to who we are, we need to have some understanding of the basic of who we are. And one of the pieces that we quite often miss, especially in many of our current cultures, is that we are three parts as a person. The one that we notice and we focus on because it's tangible is our body, and it's very amazing design. Our Creator made us very marvelous, and it's quite great. And then the second part is what is referred to as our soul. Our soul is is one of the intangible parts that we have, and we've begun to finally get a hold of the implications of the needs of our soul, and because we are now looking more at mental and emotional health as part of our world. And for my generation, those were kind of secondary, unimportant. We were not given to emotional things on the whole in terms of culturally. And so it's taken a while for us to recognize the value of awareness and learning about our soul. And our soul is made up of our mind or our thinking and our emotions. And then there's another part there, and we'll talk about that if we have time today. And that is our will, where we make our choices. And then the third part, and this part is the most neglected part for most all of us, to a point that some don't even acknowledge it exists, and that is our spirit. And it's a part of the intangible us, but the evidence of its presence is very powerful, very strong. And so we have, as a person, a spirit, and that is such a key part to really going from the knowledge and understanding and going into wisdom. Welcome, Arsalan and Priyanka. I hope I pronounced your names correctly. Just let me know if I didn't, and I'll correct it. Thanks for being here. So, understanding our makeup. We're three parts. We have a body, a soul, and a spirit. And that having that understanding is very, very critical to being able to find wisdom. Because in order to find wisdom and go from knowledge and understanding to wisdom, we've got to have that perspective of us to start with, and an understanding of how we're made up and what makes us who we are. Second part, though, is that we also need to understand what makes up other people, because part of wisdom is seeing others and our circumstances around us and what's going on in the world that we live in day to day. And one thought here, okay, is that we need to be careful, because it is easy to get caught up in the world, the big world, and get so distracted by things that we cannot influence or control that we lose sight of our own world, the world immediately around us, our family, our friends, our work situations, our neighborhoods, our communities. And when we do that, we end up not gaining wisdom as a part of that process. Because in order to move into wisdom, it involves seeing much more than just my immediate circumstances and my immediate surroundings in my life. And so that's where we begin to make that leap. And reason I chose the word leap is the difference between knowledge and understanding. And when we go into wisdom, it is quite remarkable change. And that is a good thing, is that change. And that's part of the value of gaining wisdom. Now, one of the things about this leap, as we begin to understand what we're dealing with, is that over the years, people that live long enough will generally be able to stumble into some wisdom. It just is a natural byproduct of life and age. The challenge is that it's not guaranteed. We can go through life, and I've known people that go through life and they're very intelligent and they've even had a lot of experience, but they never learn how to be wise in what's going on. And it creates a problem. One of the outcomes of not becoming wise is we will tend to make the same wrong decisions over and over again and be in a vicious cycle in our life where we're making wrong choices, and we keep making those wrong choices because we haven't gained the wisdom and the perspective that wisdom brings. It's really, really such a sad thing to watch people that are otherwise intelligent, well-spoken, a lot of adjectives, good adjectives, but they never gain wisdom, and they keep doing some of the same things over and over and over again that cause them problems. So one of the challenges is when we don't choose to gain wisdom, we create some of our own issues, some of our own problems without meaning to. And so we just got to start being intentional in making the transition from knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And bear in mind, one of the reasons that we do this, and this is a cultural shift that happened years ago, but we used to be a society, a culture that sought to be wise. And fortunately, some cultures around the world still prioritize it. And but especially here in the U.S., our culture is such that we no longer value wisdom. I did a poll on LinkedIn probably a couple of years ago and just asked if wisdom mattered. And I was surprised at the number of people said not important. And a number of people that say they're not sure, but as a culture, it's evident that we don't make it a priority. It's not something we seek. Some other evidences that we are not making the leap from knowledge and understanding to wisdom is one, and we have complained about this for a number of years, and we continue to complain, and that is a lack of common sense. See, common sense is, at the time that that phrase was coined, common sense meant that if nothing else, you had enough insight to make obvious right choices because of cultural impact and because we were had a priority of seeking wisdom. And many of you know that the complaint now is that, to put it in, I guess, street language, is that common sense ain't so common anymore. And I think that that is a byproduct of us as a culture not transitioning from knowledge and understanding into wisdom, because wisdom begins to cause us to see things in such a way that we use common sense, which is practical approaches, practical thoughts on how to make better decisions and not do the same thing over and over again. In fact, one of the famous, I believe it's Albert Einstein, quotes is that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and not and expecting different outcomes, different results. And so common sense says, I've tried this before multiple times and it happened, I got the same result every time. Whereas as we get wisdom, which with the byproduct of common sense, we began to see, hey, this didn't work before. It's not working now. So what can I do different to bring about a different result? And that's where, again, part of wisdom, we began to see that it doesn't matter what circumstance I am in, that if I keep making this same choice, that I get the same outcome. At times, one of the big things is peace. What we look for and think is a solution to peace is to eliminate world conflict, which that's nice and it's a good goal, but that is not how real peace is found. Real peace is found in internal peace and being at a point of peace internally. And that is something that if you grow in wisdom, you begin to see that in order to even have world peace, we on a large scale have to have internal peace. And that's such a key part. Welcome, Nestle. Glad to have you always. And Jeremy, glad to see you as well. Let's see here. Nestle makes a comment. Says, common sense is an important key together with our wisdom, point of views, and empathy. Always nice to listen to you. Thanks, Nestle. I appreciate that. I appreciate your comment. And that common sense is an important part of wisdom, indeed. And that is such a critical part. So as we go along and we're making this leap, one evidence that we're beginning to make the leap from knowledge and understanding to wisdom is the fact that we begin to gain a byproduct of common sense. And again, common sense is the reason it's common is because we finally observe it. We finally see the patterns. We see and gain understanding about how our decisions factor. And it's all part of a process, but you have to be intentional to get the benefit of growing in wisdom. Again, some people will stumble into wisdom over the years, no doubt about it, and it will be a factor and move forward. And so just being intentional and watching for evidence of presence of common sense, then we know we're beginning to make those that leap and moving into wisdom. Let's see. Lydia makes a comment. She says, we need intuition as our guiding light in our daily life. Sorry about that. The screen's a little unclear, Lydia. You're right. And in fact, that's a good segue into another aspect of all of this. And that is when we make a leap from where we are into wisdom, one of the byproducts, the word I use is discernment. Lydia has used the word intuition, but they're of the same type and result. And what happens is that as we make that leap from knowledge and understanding into wisdom, we begin to have an insight that is beyond necessarily physical view or physical explanation. And we call it intuition, we call it discernment, we call it gut. And a byproduct of making the leap to wisdom is that we increase in that area. It becomes more of a part of who we are and how we operate. And that's a value indeed of being able to make the leap into wisdom. And what happens is that gut or intuition or discernment helps us as we're in situations where our knowledge doesn't quite fit that situation, or our understanding has not grown to include a given situation and a given set of circumstances. And that's where our discernment, our intuition, our gut come in. And that's a byproduct of having sought out and made the leap to wisdom, because we have seen enough of things in other circumstances, situations, environments, that we begin to see patterns. And when we observe them in a different set of circumstances or with different people, we go inside, or what I call, also refer to as our internal radar, will all of a sudden raise red flags, and we know something may not be right here. And it's before it's observable what's not right. And it can be a protective thing in terms of sensing fear, sensing trouble. It can be insightful into how to react to people and their situations. It's a sense that is beyond the necessarily explainable that we try to always operate in. Again, it maybe is a different twist on knowledge that we have. It may be seeing a consequence of applying our knowledge in a certain way, even though we can't explain how it will happen. We know it will. And that's all part of when we make a leap into wisdom, that byproduct of intuition or gut or discernment, whatever phrase that you want to use, it is a part of it. And now with this part, one of the statements I'm going to make, and I hope that it's not offensive or put anybody off or discourage anyone, but in order to truly gain wisdom and be able to live in the wisdom you gain, it necessitates the recognition of our spirit and the valuing of that spirit and the nurturing of that spirit, because part of what we live in is a world that has a spiritual component. And that could be a whole nother discussion for us, because there are people that think that all there is here is a physical world, and that even mind and emotions are not a priority part, but it's just what we experience in the physical world. But it is to the detriment of understanding of the existence of a spiritual world that is occurring and is factors into our physical world. But the more we can begin to, again, accept and even nurture our spirit, we're going to have a greater capacity to gain wisdom and as a result, to have common sense or to have discernment, intuition. That's all part of making that leap from operating just in the physical, the body world, and the soul world, which is mental and emotional. Those many people operate just in those two realms and ignore our spiritual part of who we are. And there is plenty of evidence to support that this is true. Now, just as a caveat, I like to explain, and this is true of many things, that we can't prove scientifically many of these things. And I will go so far as to say much of what we call scientific proof today doesn't make the cut of scientific expression and scientific consideration as originally thought of, which meant proof was only when we could replicate it in the lab. It wasn't just about probabilities and mathematical statistic and things like that, because proof meant that, and what I think of as fact, it becomes that way only when it can be demonstrable over and over and over again with the same outcome. But I digress a little bit there. So as we make the transition from knowledge and understand to wisdom, there's a lot of different components. One of them is recognizing our makeup, who we are, and recognizing that others are made up in the same fashion. And the result of seeing and having that wise perspective is we understand better why people do what people do. And it helps us, for example, rather than assume someone is doing something in order to create a problem for us or other people, to understand they're doing that because that's a part of who they are. That's how they're made up. In fact, we talk so much about empathy, and I'm a firm believer in empathy. But to truly be empathetic, you need to be truly complete in who you are and working in all three parts of who we are in order to be truly empathetic. One of the factors is that when we are attuned to our total person, including our spirit, we began to understand and connect with people on different levels and be able to connect with them so that we have a better understanding and a sense about them that is beyond the physical, mental, and emotional. And that is part of this wisdom process. Part of the wisdom is we see things in a much bigger perspective. We see that just because someone, or we have insight in just because someone is smiling and saying the right words, that maybe we sense that there's something else there, that there's more to it. And this is all part of transitioning from knowledge and understanding to wisdom, and the byproduct of that leap. And it is quite remarkable for those that choose and prioritize wisdom and making that leap. It's a real game changer. You begin to have understanding, insight into your world and the worlds around you and the people involved. And that's part of the value and the beauty of gaining wisdom, going beyond knowledge and experience and understanding. That leap is just so remarkable, and it can save us from problems. It's at times, there's been many accounts now of people that sense or have an intuition or discernment about a situation, and they make a choice to do or not to do something, and later learn that that choice caused them to avoid a problem of some kind. Even some cases, people have had those happen and avoided death as a result. And so it's, again, making the leap to wisdom is so important and so valuable. And the another part of having a wise perspective and making that leap is that it helps us to have perspectives and responses that are different than if we were operating under knowledge and understanding only. Because for me, an example is that a part of having gained some wisdom is that I began to see people and circumstances beyond what I strictly observe with my eyes. It allows me, or even forces me, to go, okay, this person's actions would tell me one thing, and that's based on my knowledge and based on my experience. But then when wisdom becomes a part, I go, okay, there may be more to this, and especially in the area of assuming motivations. See, as we grow wiser, we begin to get away from textbook answer motivations. Well, somebody cut me off driving down the road. The assumptions quite often is they were trying to be selfish. They were trying to be arrogant, any of a number of motivations. When what we have, as we gain wisdom, we begin to go, okay, the reason they cut me off, it was simply a lapse of judgment, a temporary issue. It may be that they had something going on, a physical distraction or emotional distraction that caused them to make that decision. So again, as we grow in wisdom and we start seeing that much bigger perspective and that seeing things outside ourselves, then it causes us to make different choices. And again, to use current phraseology, it causes us to begin to make more commonsensical decisions and observations. Indeed, Lydia says it helps us to set boundaries with clarity. One of the nice things about wisdom, making that leap, is it helps us to see things that cause us to be able to make decisions, to set boundaries, because we have gotten to a point where beyond just knowledge and understanding and immediate circumstances, that we began to see the consequences, especially unintended consequences. And when we began to see unintended consequences, it's real common at that point we go, okay, I have experienced these unintended consequences many times, and I don't want to experience them again. So I am willing to set boundaries, which means saying no and being uncomfortable sometimes. Part of the reason we don't set boundaries quite often is it's not comfortable, because we take a chance of offending someone or hurting feelings, however you want to express it. But because of wisdom, we've seen what happens, the unintended consequences of it, we then go, but it's still important enough that I set that boundary. And the other part of it, and this is again that value of making the leap from knowledge and understanding to wisdom, is we also began to have the insight to explain why we set the boundary. I'm not trying to set this boundary to hurt your feelings or to be difficult. I'm setting this boundary because in the past, when I haven't set that boundary, this consequence, especially an unintended consequence, happens. And it causes other issues. It causes other problems. And so, again, that bigger perspective, that more than just what's happening right at that moment in my immediate circumstances. And by the way, I'm not saying that we should focus in such a way that we're not present. In fact, people that have made the choice to take the leap from knowledge and understanding to wisdom quite often are much more present, because they, as a part of this process, they learn that to be present is important, and the value of being present is so great. And so I would suggest that by gaining wisdom, we will tend to be much more present, if nothing else, because we've learned in this process that if we're not present, we're going to miss things that can help us in the future in terms of making good choices. Let's see. Jeremy makes a comment. When we obtain wisdom, we exercise our pineal gland, and when that happens, it assists us with sharpening our spiritual intuition as well as our intuition itself. Indeed, thanks for that, Jeremy. I'm not familiar with pineal gland. I'm going to have to learn some more myself, but I know that the body is and our person is so amazing, so uniquely designed that, we can, and I'm probably going to open up a can of worms a bit here, but we can create artificial intelligence and robots all day long, but we'll never have those that have wisdom, because they lack spirit and cannot be created. And we may duplicate a pineal gland, but unless it has all the inputs, it's not going to be completely effective as we as humans are. But yes, it's all part of our system working together. Anton and I on Tuesdays talk about this all the time, how holistically we must be healthy in order to be really healthy. And it can't be just body, because, and we see the evidence of that. People that are physically fit and strong and meet, our poster children for a picture of health, and they're falling over dead from heart attacks and strokes and cancer and lots of other diseases. So it's not just about the physical. And then the mental and emotional piece is a factor, no doubt, because they influence the body and how it responds, such as pineal gland and so on. And so those are factor, but the spirit is such a key factor as well, because the spirit and having that active is an additional input that we might not otherwise have. That's a big part of having our discernment and intuition, is we have a nurtured or healthier spirit about us. And that is when we begin to see things that we don't see, so to speak, and understand things that don't always have a logical explanation or understanding at that moment. Quite often, after we've experienced it and began to learn how to operate in that environment under those in a holistic way, we see later why that sensing that became important. A common one is that we get around a person that is new to us, but we have a sense about them that causes us hopefully not to overreact, but to be aware and to be, on guard, if you will, to be careful. And later we find out that there's good reason that we were sensing that this person turns out to be whatever, and usually not good somehow. Or other sense is that people are around us and they're telling us everything's great, but we sense inside something isn't right. And what happens is, in time, it becomes evident that our instinct, our intuition, discernment was correct. But what happens is, as we make the leap from knowledge and understanding to wisdom, we can make choices more to include that part of the decision-making process, is these other inputs. And so again, one of the big difference, a lot of people have knowledge and even understanding and experience, but they don't make the leap of wisdom. And so they don't see these things until sometimes ever, that never connects to them and it never makes sense to them, or nor do they prioritize or appreciate it. And or what happens more commonly is by the time the situation unfolds, the consequences occur, it's too late to be proactive. Then we're moved into a reactive state. And by the way, as a matter of design, we are not designed to live in a reactive way. That is not the way we're designed as humans. We are designed to be responsive. And that means having the understanding and insight that wisdom brings to not react, which usually means saying things, doing things rashly, or too quickly, or in the wrong way, versus responsive, which includes things like counting down, take a breath, especially, and this is where wisdom helps us, is learning our design priority. Our design priority, and this is something I've talked about many times before, we have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. But many of us operate unwisely and we get the priority wrong. We behave as if we've got many mouths and less ears and eyes, and that gets us in trouble. We say things and express ourselves verbally in ways that is hurtful and even damaging, and even can cause permanent negative result to relationships. So back to making the leap. First of all, we've got to be intentional. You've got to choose that you want to gain wisdom and to live wisely. That's a choice. And we do so by, again, back to the idea of not focusing just on what's happening in the moment, and not just focusing on what it means to us. We have to make a choice to look beyond the moment. Doesn't mean we stop living in the moment, but to look beyond the moment, backwards and forwards, and to then make choices accordingly. And as we do this, we begin to have some extra components that makes a difference. One is common sense. And we then have a basis in common sense that causes us to make choices that are more sensical. And then the other is the honing and reception to our intuition, our discernment, which is a part of the non-tangible of us that factors in that. So it just becomes a real key there to begin to operate in wisdom and make that leap from one to the other. Now, one of the things that we've dealt with over time is and there are some people that are biased in this regard, that only older people can be wise. And that's far from true. It's very far from true. I know, in fact, I've got a guest coming in next week that is going to join us. It's a young person that I've connected with on LinkedIn. And what attracted me to this young person is a comment that they want to be a voice for their generation. And part of that is to help their generation begin to make wise choices. And what I have grown to understand about this young person is that they have wisdom themselves. This is Brielle Wollenhouse. So I'm looking forward to having her next week on the show. But we see this in other ways, and especially in young people that have had challenging lives. They may have a physical abnormality, deformity. They may have had physical limitations, or maybe dealing with diseases as a young person that are very hard and very challenging. But what I find is that the young people that have gone through these various types of adversities are quite often wise, as the saying goes, wise beyond their years. And so what has happened is that life forces on them struggles and challenges, and hopefully they choose to not give up and move through it. The result is that as a young person, they're wiser than their years. And what is sad is in many of our cultures, we have worked so hard to avoid for young people dealing with the challenges that life brings to them, that we cause them to miss the opportunity to gain wisdom even at a younger age. And when we do that, we short circuit design of who we are and how our world is designed to operate. And so, yes, we see more wisdom come with age simply because there's a lot of people that aren't actively seeking it. And the result is it takes a much longer time to get any wisdom. And unfortunately, the wisdom that we might get is not always fully developed, and the byproduct of that wisdom isn't there. So we can, by choosing to seek wisdom, gain it starting at an earlier age. It's very fascinating that my grandchildren, because of their parents' choices and how that they are being raised, they have more wisdom at their young age than a lot of adults I know. And it's because it's been an intentional choice on their part, the part of their parents, to help them find wisdom in their life experiences and to make a leap even as a younger person. And what happens is, as a result, it will build on itself. When you start and you set a foundation of wisdom and becomes your means of operation on a regular basis, you have a greater chance to gain much more wisdom and benefit from the positive results of that wisdom. Lydia makes a comment. I'm sorry, Lydia, I got kind of out on a rabbit trail there. But intuition leads to inner peace and often accurate. Indeed, one of the values of gaining wisdom and getting that discernment or intuition is that we begin to not just reactively, but proactively benefit from the understanding of that and being able to operate in it, because what happens is it allows us to avoid unnecessary struggles or unnecessary adversity. And that's not the same as trying to avoid all adversity and challenges and conflict. That it's different. We will still have those challenges. And if we're wise, we recognize those challenges as not there to harm us or there to make life bad, but rather to help us grow in all aspects as a person, which ultimately results in wisdom. And as we gain wisdom and begin to walk wisely, then a byproduct of that's inner peace, because we're operating in a state the way we're designed to. So as we begin to wind down, making the leap from knowledge and understanding, first of all, has to be a choice. It's something we purpose to do. We're intentional in it. And part of the choices that we've got to make that leap is an understanding of who we are. We are a three-part being. We have a body, that one we see, we understand, and that's easy to get. A little less easy to grasp and deal with is our soul, which houses our mind and our will and emotions. And we are just in recent years getting to a place in our culture that we're beginning to embrace that as part of who we are, and that we are taking seriously how to be healthy mentally and emotionally, so that we are functioning well. And then the next step in this process, and as a culture, we have been here before, but we have moved away from it. My hope is that we will reconsider, and that is our spirit part of us. And if we really want to be wise, then we have to acknowledge that we have a spirit, and then that necessitates some other considerations and decisions about what life is about for us and how to understand and nurture and live with that part of our being. And that's so important. But as we do, then, and as we purpose to gain wisdom, we will gain much more wisdom and insight through that process. And by the way, as far as nurturing your spirit, there are different ways to approach it. First, again, recognize it's part of who we are. Second of all, nurture our spirit. And what that looks like, there are a lot of opinions. I have mine, and I have the journey that I've been on in regards to my spirit, which involves generally some kind of faith, some kind of experience along the way that is unique to our spirit. But it's a necessary part if we're going to gain wisdom. A couple of things come to mind: prayer, meditation, reading, especially historic writings about spiritual things. Of course, the obvious one that is probably the most well-known, certainly the most sold and hopefully read, is the Bible. And it gives us insight into who we are and into our spirit and so on. Others I know will use other writings similar, such as the Hindu writings or the Quran or different ones. We each have to, if we finally accept that we have a spiritual component, that causes us to have to make choices. And in fact, one of the things we talked about back when probably a year ago related to this is the physical life the only thing there is? And if we acknowledge that we have a spirit, that is part of us, then we have to ask the question, does that spirit, does our soul end in the death of our body? And if how we land on that will determine a lot of things. And if we decide there's more than just what we experience in the life of our physical body, creates a whole nother set of opportunities and need to learn and grow and experience life differently. If you choose to consider there's more beyond what happens in this physical world, it leads to additional wisdom because we look and prioritize our perspectives of what this world looks like as part of a longer world or a bigger world. Term I use is eternity. And when, again, that gives us a whole new bigger picture to consider as part of this process. And that when we have that bigger picture, then it allows us to become wise on many levels, much more than just if we only see our body and our soul as part of this. So lots there, but I just pray, I encourage that each of you, first of all, be a wisdom seeker. Second of all, that you become intentional in growing in your wisdom beyond just the moment. As we do, the result, generally speaking, is going to be very positive, and our relationships and how we see the world and behave in our world becomes real different. So thanks everyone for being here today. I hope that we've been able to gain some wisdom about making the leap into wisdom, and how that it's much more than just gaining knowledge and understanding, which is what our world and cultures currently focus in on. Let's make that leap into wisdom so that we can reap the great benefit of making that leap. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone's input. Hope that you have an amazing week, and I hope that you gain some new wisdom and insight this week. Take care, everyone. See you next Monday for the next episode of Wisdom Seeker. Thanks. Bye now.